What if I told you that the two laboratory mice you laughed at as a kid weren't just out to take over the world, and that buried inside their endless, ridiculous schemes, there are subtle, eerie truths about power, control, and human nature itself, truths the writers never expected you to fully catch. You're probably thinking, come on, it's just Pinky and the Brain. How deep could it possibly go? Well, let's just say, once you see the hidden layers, you'll never watch this cartoon the same way again. Let's rewind to 1995. Kids' TV was in the middle of a renaissance. Animaniacs had just exploded in popularity. Cartoon humor was sharper than it had been in years.
People are just too stupid to accept me as their leader.
Enough!
It's too bad you can't make people smarter.
And Steven Spielberg, yes, that Spielberg, was executive producing animated shows like they were blockbuster films. Pinky and the Brain was a spin-off that nobody saw coming, and yet it became one of the most clever, sophisticated cartoons ever made for kids. You know what kids really need? Existential dread delivered by genetically modified rodents. Yup, that's what we were missing. At its core, the premise was absurdly simple. Two genetically altered mice. One a towering intellect, the other, well, not so much. Try every single night to take over the world.
Start paddling, Pinky. We must reach the lab before tomorrow night.
Why? What are we going to do tomorrow night, Brain?
Same thing we do every night, Pinky. Try to take over the world.
But here's the thing. It wasn't just the schemes that kept you watching. It was the subtext. Before Pinky and the Brain, animal protagonists in cartoons were either slapstick goofballs or cutesy mascots designed to sell cereal. This was different. The Brain wasn't just smart, he was calculating, manipulative, and deeply cynical. Pinky wasn't just dumb, he was unpredictable, selfless, and somehow more human than most human characters on TV. The tone was sharper. Jokes often referenced political leaders, pop culture, and even Cold War paranoia, things that would fly right over the heads of most 10-year-olds. It was a show that looked like a kid's comedy, but was secretly a satire of ambition and bureaucracy. Most people don't realize how much Pinky and the Brain's brilliance came down to precision. Voice actors Rob Paulsen, Pinky, and Maurice LaMarche, the Brain, weren't just reading lines. They were delivering performances with deliberate timing, rhythm, and tonal shifts that mimicked classic duos like Abbott and Costello, and even Orson Welles. That's not an exaggeration. The Brain's voice was directly inspired by Welles. LaMarche reportedly studied his cadences down to the breath, giving the Brain that deep, dramatic gravitas, even when he was trying to steal every goldfish in the tri-state area. Meanwhile, Pinky's rambling nonsense catchphrases like "narf" and "zort" weren't random at all. They were strategically placed to break tension, punctuate punchlines, and keep the Brain's intensity from overwhelming the scene. And then there was the animation. Watch closely and you'll notice the backgrounds in the Brain's lab aren't sterile or generic. They're cluttered, shadowed, almost claustrophobic. The lighting subtly frames the Brain as both a genius and a prisoner. You can practically feel that this is a mind trapped in a cage, physically and metaphorically. Even the lighting department was having an existential crisis about the nature of ambition and confinement.
The Brain! I didn't give him. The letter is very, very important.
Give me that stupid letter. Now throw the switch when the meter hits red.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The writers, many of whom had backgrounds in sketch comedy and political satire, slipped in layers of meaning. The Brain's endless failures weren't just a running gag, they were a statement. Every night, the Brain hatches a new plan. Every night, it falls apart. Sometimes because of Pinky's incompetence, sometimes because of sheer bad luck, but often because of the Brain himself. It's a cycle that mirrors real-world leaders who believe they're destined to rule, but sabotage themselves through arrogance and tunnel vision. And here's the part you probably really didn't notice as a kid. Some of the villains in the series were thinly veiled parodies of real-world figures, politicians, media moguls, even billionaires. Names changed, appearances exaggerated, but the message? Crystal clear. One episode even pokes fun at TV executives who interfere with creative vision, basically biting the very hand that fed them on primetime television. The audacity of making fun of your own bosses on their own network is either genius or career destruction. I'd say possibly both. Like many smart cartoons of the 90s, Pinky and the Brain sometimes pushed the limits of what network censors would allow. Reportedly, some scripts were toned down or reworked entirely when they hit too close to real-world events. For example, there was an unaired segment involving a scheme that parodied a then-sitting world leader. Word is, it got scrapped after network higher-ups deemed it too political for a children's block. In another case, subtle jokes about surveillance culture were rewritten to be less unsettling. Because apparently, cartoon mice plotting world domination was fine, but cartoon mice making fun of government overreach? That was a step too far. It wasn't just political jokes either. Even some of Pinky's more surreal one-liners were reportedly cut when executives thought kids wouldn't get it, as if the show's charm wasn't precisely in the fact that half the jokes were aimed at adults in the room. Behind the scenes, the pace was brutal, the animation was high quality, the scripts were densely packed with wordplay, and the humor had to balance slapstick with sharp satire. That meant rewrites, constant rewrites. Writers have talked about pulling late nights, animators worked under crushing deadlines, and the voice actors sometimes recorded for hours to nail a single exchange's timing. And here's the kicker, by the late 90s, the network decided to freshen the show with a rebrand, Pinky, Elmyra, and the Brain. If you've never seen it, the concept was controversial. The mice were now living with Elmyra from Tiny Toon Adventures in what was basically a forced sitcom setting. Why? Allegedly, because executives felt the original format was getting stale and needed a relatable human element to attract new viewers. In reality, it drained away much of the clever satire and replaced it with broader, louder comedy. The result? The creative team was frustrated, the fan base was split, and even the theme song threw shade at the network with the line, "It's what the network wants."
Bought a discount turtle, but ended up with more.
Furry things are nice. I love my talking mice.
Why bother to complain? That wasn't subtext. That was a direct middle finger to corporate meddling, baked right into the show's opening. By the time Pinky and the Brain was a few seasons in, it had built something rare, a loyal audience that spanned kids, teens, and adults. You'd think that would make the network happy. But in television, mass appeal can be a double-edged sword. The higher-ups at Warner Brothers reportedly wanted to make the show easier to market to younger viewers. Translation: fewer political parodies, more simple physical comedy, and a storyline that could be packaged for toy tie-ins. And that's where Pinky, Elmyra, and the Brain came in. The change wasn't just cosmetic. Entire story structures were altered. Dialogue was simplified. Those subtle, slow-burn punchlines that once took a whole scene to set up? Gone, replaced by fast gags and slapstick. The lab, once a moody, atmospheric space that reflected the Brain's ambition, was swapped for Elmyra's chaotic suburban home. The lighting, the staging, the very feel of the show shifted overnight. The original creative team? Not thrilled. Maurice LaMarche has even joked in interviews that he never met some of the people making decisions about the characters he'd been voicing for years. That's how distant the creative core had become from the powers controlling it. Here's where it gets especially strange. There are scripts and storyboards from the Pinky and the Brain era that never made it past the early stages. Some were shelved due to budget concerns. Others, more mysterious. One reportedly involved a multi-episode arc where the Brain actually succeeds in taking over the world, only to realize ruling it is far worse than chasing it. The network allegedly vetoed it because it ended the premise. God forbid we explore character growth and narrative conclusion. That's not what cartoons are for, apparently. But to the writers, that was the point. The show was always about the futility of ambition, the comedy of failure. To finally flip that on its head? That would have been groundbreaking. Another lost episode idea had the Brain confronting his own creators in the lab, a meta storyline where he discovers he's not the only experiment and faces the possibility of being replaced. Dark, yes, but the animators believed it could have been one of the most emotionally charged stories in the series. Instead, these ideas were left in filing cabinets or, in some cases, quietly passed around in photocopied scripts among staff. Cartoon contraband for the initiated. When the rebranded series hit production, the creative burnout returned, only faster this time. The new format came with tighter deadlines and more rigid oversight. Writers' room debates turned into outright fights. Some veteran animators left mid-season, and for the voice actors, recording sessions began to feel like damage control, trying to salvage humor from scripts that lacked the wit they once enjoyed.
Rain, tell me again about the special suits we shall wear as Masters of the Earth. Suits of fine gold and candy corn.
Not here.
Rob Paulson, Pinky, has spoken warmly about the characters, but has also hinted that the later years were less fun. It's hard to play an absurd, free-spirited optimist when you know the sharpness of the material has been dulled by committee. The irony? Even as the rebrand stumbled creatively, the characters themselves remained beloved. Kids still quoted Narf on playgrounds. Adults still caught the sly lines that slipped past censors, and the brain's obsessive nightly plans still echoed our own human tendency to chase goals we'll never quite reach. But if you do reach them, it can be because of this series. Even after its finale in 1998 and the end of Pinky, Elmyra, and the Brain in 1999, the show's DNA lived on. The writing style influenced other Warner Brothers animated hits. The willingness to slip in adult-aimed humor without breaking the kid-friendly veneer.
Pinky, are you pondering what I'm pondering?
Well, I think so, Brain, but if we didn't have ears, we'd look like weasels.
Blueprint for series like Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends, Phineas and Ferb, and even certain arcs of SpongeBob SquarePants. Here's the part that almost no one outside the inner circle talks about. In the late 90s, while the show was still on air, there was reportedly a pitch for a Pinky and the Brain feature-length film. The premise? The Brain is finally on the verge of success. No interruptions, no Pinky blunders. He's done it. But as he steps into the role of global ruler, he realizes the price of victory. A world stripped of the chaos, unpredictability, and heart that Pinky brought into his life. A cartoon about the emptiness of achieving your dreams? Oh boy, the climax would have forced the Brain to make a choice: keep his empire, or undo it all to save his only friend. It would have been a story about the cost of ambition, the meaning of loyalty, and underneath all the absurdity, love. And according to whispers from those who saw early drafts, the ending was bittersweet. The Brain walks away from power, back into the lab, where Pinky's waiting with his usual, "What are we going to do tomorrow night?" The Brain's answer? The same thing we do every night, try to take over the world. But the big bosses didn't think a kids' movie with a bittersweet ending would sell. And so, the project quietly died. Looking back now, Pinky and the Brain wasn't just about two cartoon mice. It was a mirror for our politics, for our workplaces, for our own stubborn habits we can't seem to break. It was a comedy about ambition, but also about friendship, about the fact that sometimes the thing we think we want isn't nearly as important as the person beside us when we're chasing it. Because creativity like that, it's fragile. One executive decision, one shift in marketing strategy, one push for mass appeal, and that spark can be gone. The show didn't just fade because of ratings. It faded because the system that created it couldn't understand the magic it had in the first place. So now you know. Pinky and the Brain wasn't just a Saturday morning cartoon, it was a masterclass in satire, a love letter to classic comedy duos, and a cautionary tale about the cost of chasing control. It was lightning in a bottle, and like all lightning, it's impossible to trap twice. The question is, now that you know the truth, do you still see it as just a goofy cartoon? Or do you see the hidden blueprint of ambition, friendship, and failure that was there all along? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Was the rebrand unfairly hated, or the death of the magic? And if you thought this had hidden layers, wait until you hear about the other 90s cartoon that was secretly more subversive than anything on adult TV. But that is a story for another day. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and tell us in the comments below. If you were Brain, what would be your first plan to take over the world? Please answer in maximum 5 words to make it more fun.